loud. Okay, so we are in the mode of social media, using social media to talk about engagement. So Dr. Richard Weaver, Mary Beth McCabe here, representing National University and a research study that we're working on. Say hi, Dick.
Good morning. Good to see everybody here. Hope we have a good discussion.
I am very excited to be here today. I'm very excited to be talking about this topic because it's something that I've been thinking about and really looking into for several years. And with Richard, we've been doing this research on educational programs for at least 2 years, looking at what educational programs are offering on digital marketing. And this is the second in our studies. This one particularly focused on mobile marketing. So I'm going to share my screen right now, and we're going to pop up a short demonstration of some of the work that we've done, and then we'll get started. Okay, so Richard and myself are talking about what 9% of the US GDP is being spent on now. That's the number 2 item in the budget behind healthcare. And the amount of that budget is somewhere between $1.3 and $2 trillion per year just in the United States. So that's a big number. We weren't able to find any research to this date about how education programs are being marketed effectively. So with that, there are 100,000 public schools, there are 30,000 private schools, and about 4,000 charter schools in the K through 12 space in the US right now. So we're going to share some insights, and these are kind of our recommendations where we're kind of ending, showing a little bit of the end right now, so we want to get you interested in seeing more. So Richard and I have been studying effectiveness, and what does that look like when it comes to marketing educational programs? Richard, would you like to take a little stab at this first?
Sure, because as we take a look at the messages that organizations are using in social media, what we've found is that there was such a range of what people were doing and saying, not just between organizations, but even within organizational efforts. And what we were seeing is being able to have a regular and consistent message that really carries through and reinforces itself really makes a difference in terms of being able to be more effective. And we're also seeing the use of social media in so many ways is informal, and it is about connection, but we really found that some social media were actually treating it a little too informally, as opposed to recognizing that it really is professional in the way they go about it. And so people who are creating social media messages need to approach it in a really professional manner and make sure that it is relevant to the people who are actually going to be viewing it, that you want to engage. And it becomes an interesting process of looking at the combination of the messages so that they really are engaging, so that it isn't just a one-way transmission of information that we have in the process. And that since it is a social media that we're talking about relationships, we were really looking at what is being done in the messaging process that really supports a more trusting relationship and, in the end, a more satisfying experience for the user who is receiving the social media message.
Well, thank you for that summary. So, like I said, we're kind of giving the answers at the end. That we're giving a little teaser to those, because now we're going to take you through the steps that we took over the past 2 years to get to this. And so we believe that if you stick around, and we'll have a few questions from our audience, we'll be happy to answer those live because we can. And I think that this is going to be very stimulating. Now, as I mentioned before, this is a $2 trillion industry. So we looked at these research questions in social media, but prior to doing this, we actually looked at the challenges that marketing education programs had, because it's a very complex world out there. And we were looking at the different companies that were out there, and how did we find these companies? So the way we found these companies, well, we looked at outcomes, we looked at search, and so we searched for those outcomes. And I see Bobby DePorter is here in our webinar. And Bobby, I want you to know that these came originally from SuperCamp and some of the outcomes from your 8 keys of excellence. And those were the following: establishing a positive school culture, increasing academic performance, improving safety, decreasing problem behavior, and then physically active classrooms and education. So that was where we found our original companies, organizations that we looked at. And that paper will also be presented this coming January in Hawaii with Dr. Richard Weaver and myself. So if you have any questions or comments about this, we would love to hear from you live during this session. So the questions we looked at for this particular paper were: what platforms are being used, what organizations are presenting, so how do they present it, and then are those organizations engaging? And we'll talk more about engagement because we looked at motivation as part of the research questions. The theory behind our studies had to do with motivation. And then what kind of satisfaction did we get? What is the organization's satisfaction that came out of those users or customers who engaged in that social media? So based on this as the premise as far as the research questions for this, I'm going to give you some examples of some of the data that we discovered. And so this one is a Facebook page from a year ago for an organization called Success for All. And it is a nonprofit, it's a .org, and it was a beautiful visual. Now, I went back a year later. I went back last week, a year after this data was recovered, and found out that the exact same cover is still there. They haven't changed their graphics on their profile page. Really, very little has changed from this example, Success for All. And I'll give you a little kind of a heads up. This was not one of the more successful of the organizations that we studied for social media. And we'll be showing you in a bit how they all ranked, how they all performed based on the criteria that we looked at. Now, here's another example. Have you heard of FISH, the FISH philosophy? Well, this page scored very high among the 5 factors that I mentioned. FISH was started in Seattle back in the days where people were throwing fish at each other, and it became an organization that helps develop teamwork. So their Facebook page here, or their Twitter page here, is now an example of the engagement that FISH was getting comments and shares, and the visuals that they provided here were very effective. Now, I mentioned that I took a year later look and saw what was being done. And here's an example of what is being done by Edutopia, who scored among the very highest of our engaging organizations. If you haven't heard of Edutopia, it's a private nonprofit .org, and it's also a sponsor of National Public Radio, but it's founded by George Lucas Educational Foundation, and they're entertainment-based. Okay, so their tagline is "Join the Movement for Change." They're trying to get other people to participate. And so this new insight that came to me just this month was that instead of asking for a Twitter page like, what they asked for was a follow. Okay, so instead of saying go to our page and like it or follow us, what Edutopia has done, which is a wonderful tactic, is share a link with your followers. This is a very good tactic. This helps to grow their community in a bigger and better way than just coming out and visiting our Twitter feed, because the link could be resonating with thousands of other people in addition to just adding to the messaging. I would like to share one other example, and that's Greater Good Magazine. Now, this came from Berkeley. This is another EDU. It's a public nonprofit. The Greater Good Science Center helps get insights for more meaningful lives. So this is another example of share a link with your followers rather than just go visit our Twitter page. So I'm intending to show you in a few minutes what all the results were, but I think you can get a feel for just these last two. These probably will be among the higher ranking out of all that we studied. They seem to be strategically focused. They seem to be focused on really engaging, one of our key metrics there. Now, we've been hearing about data and legitimate followers versus non-legitimate followers. So I want to show you just kind of like a story about maybe a non-legitimate follower. And this came from a friend of mine named Andy Altman. He identified the SDSU website, the Facebook page, of an overnight success. So it went from just a few hundred to nearly 50,000 likes within 24 hours. This does not sound right. And just looking at the notes here, that SDSU West page, how many people actually clicked that like button? So there could be some question about the veracity of data. The reliability and the validity is certainly in question. If you go from just 300 likes to 49,000 likes overnight, something's probably wrong, right? So this could be something to further study. Comments on this, Richard?
Well, it's that piece about how current is information. And so one of the things that you were seeing as you looked from last year to this year was that some social media pages were static. They just really had not changed, while other ones are looking for new and different ways of providing information and engagement that they didn't have previously. And so one of the things that's often happened is a new technology comes, you kind of get a starting point to it, and then you move on to something else, and it languishes in that process. And what we were really seeing, the more effective use of social media is generally we're very consistently keeping in up-to-date with current information. And so if you visit it, you see something different, which is certainly much more attractive and I think much more effective.
Excellent. Excellent point. So the recency of data is really important. And that is one of the things we looked at in our study. How recent was the post being made? And then how many reviews did they get? And a number of other factors like that. So this is a live chat. If we have some questions from those who are attending, we're happy to respond to them. If you want, there's a chat box right there that you can type your questions in, or otherwise you can raise your hand and ask a question. Happy to answer, and happy to answer any later as well. So we're going to step into some of the metrics now. Again, if you have questions on this, we're happy to respond. Our metrics were looking at digital channels and how effective were they, and we used a study by Aziz and Kamluddin from 2014. We looked at 5 metrics: usability, efficiency, accessibility, interaction, and then the metrics or the numbers. Richard, why did we select this as our metric?
As we were looking at both regular websites and looking at the use of social media, we were very honestly saying we need some criteria in which to evaluate, and we looked at a number of different approaches. And as we read this particular study, we both experienced that this material was practical. We could actually look at a website and have some sense in much more concrete terms how they were doing on each of these. And so as a coherent whole, it made sense. And as a tool for looking at websites and for looking at social media, we found that these various criteria were very helpful to us.
And I'll also mention that the methodology we used allowed us to make a slight change to the last 2 items on the list. So we used more of a social media toolkit using the word interaction, and again with the final one, metrics, because in looking at social media, that was really the way that we looked at satisfaction.
And,
okay,
I just wanted to add, just reinforce that last part that you said in terms of that we started with the study as a backbone, but it was really designed primarily to look at websites, and we used that in another study that we did. But as we were looking at social media, we needed to come up with something that was much more appropriate. We couldn't find anything else out there. And so we started with the Aziz study and adapted it from there.
And we're encouraging other researchers to use this or our studies to continue this, looking at how effective is the social channel in your organization, whether it be education, whether it be a B2B, B2C, or any other organization. We think this is a tool that you could use in your kit. So now we're going to drive into the data, okay? And what you're looking at right here is a list of the different organizations that we found from our original Google search, finding that criteria that we mentioned before. And then after looking at the web pages, we looked at their social media. So where you see the word yes, that indicates the organization had that in November of 2016, and it was listed on their webpage, and it was easily found. So you'll see that everybody had at least Facebook and Twitter. Several had YouTube, and those were the 3 that we'll dive into next, because those were the primary ways that we were able to measure the satisfaction or the metrics. You will notice Success for All, which is the first image that I showed today, had just Facebook and Twitter. And even today, those are the 2 that their main channels. We also found that ASCD had quite a few. So they had a Pinterest, LinkedIn, Instagram, and even Flickr. So that was a lot. And one organization also had a Google Plus account.
And one of the things we found as we were looking at them, again, referencing what I had mentioned before about how current, it was really clear that the attention of the organizations tended to focus on particular ones. And we'll see that later in terms of followers and likes, that some got a lot more attention there and less in others. And my sense was a lot of that came from where they really were putting their attention, even though they might have some residual presence on a number of platforms, they were paying particular attention to only a smaller number.
So if you're in education and your $2 trillion budget is going to improve the level of educational benefits. What we're saying here is that maybe it would be a good idea to pay attention to the engagement that you're getting on your social channels. And we're going to show a little further about which channels were getting higher levels of satisfaction and which weren't. Now, so any questions on this page? Let's move forward then, and we can come back to it if we need to. So this is a little blurry in a big screen, but Edutopia had 1 million followers on Facebook. We Are Teachers, number 2. The Association of Supervision is number 3. Greater Good Science Center, number 4. And then the rest were pretty much on a smaller scale. Pretty much on a smaller scale after that. And Twitter was similar. Edutopia, We Are Teachers, the ASCD, and then Greater Good, with the National Association of Elementary School being next, and so on, down to a lower end where it was Counseling in Schools had only 83 Twitter followers. So probably they weren't that vested in the platform. Our third that we're going to present today is YouTube. And as you can see, there were 10,400,000 views on Edutopia. Remember, that was George Lucas, and it had the entertainment value. So we know that there was a lot to be said for having the founder of Star Wars as the person that is backing your organization. The Greater Good Science Center had Berkeley backing them. We have almost 4 million views on YouTube. And We Are Teachers with about 660,000, and Fish with nearly, 570,000 views on YouTube. And the others had less or 0 views. So this is our main, kind of the big picture, so to speak, where our data shows the connections that each organization we studied has with social media and the value among those 5 criteria: the usability, the efficiency, the accessibility, the interaction, the metrics, and then the total when we looked at all of those. Okay, so what you can see here in color is that there are 5 different ways that were being measured, and then the purple bar is the total connections and the ranking that they received as far as the engagement. So how engaging were they in terms of their audience and their users, their followers? So we think that this is a chart that these organizations will use as kind of a grade book to see how did they do. What kind of a score does our data show that they would receive? And the top scores, We Are Teachers, Edutopia, ASCD, Greater Good, those get the highest scores. The ones that are on the left-hand side of the chart are the ones that really need to take a better, closer look at what connections that they've made and what they could be doing in the future to improve.
So one of the ideas here is the idea of benchmarking. That it does 2 things. It gives you a sense as an organization how you stack up against the competition, the others who are offering similar types of services, but also opens up the doors about what's possible, because I think many organizations kind of work in their own bubble and they're feeling really good about what they're able to do. And then you suddenly realize, oh, these other organizations are off the chart compared to us. And so I think that it's an opportunity for organizations to both kind of get a sense relative to others in the field, how they're doing, but it also gives the opportunities to introduce stretch factor. What else might they be able to do? What else are people doing? It's in that way good intelligence for what's going on in the marketplace. Thank you.
So let me just give an example about the New York Department of Education, if I can. So you can see they are scored. I'm going to go right to that with a red marker here. You can see where they score. They're the second lowest of all the organizations that we found based on those on the search. So you would think that with the resources of New York State, that they would have a high relevancy and engagement with social media. Obviously, they did not. And so it was a disappointing. I grew up in New York. I was a product of New York State schools myself. Some of the reasons why you could look into yourself probably, but I'll just give you a kind of a snapshot. Their Twitter page was run by one woman, and her picture was on it. And she was really the only person that was in charge of the Twitter account for the New York Department of Education. I believe she was a commissioner of sorts. And so, how many people wanted to engage with her? Her picture was there, and it is still there. So unless you really felt that the content was engaging, I can understand why the number of Twitter followers that you would have would be very low.
And I think along those lines is this whole idea of how intentional is the organization trying to use social media and for what ends. We had the sense as we were looking at the folks from New York that they were really more complying with the distribution of information than actually trying to engage people in conversation and around the materials that they had available. They had some excellent materials available. They were just very flat in the way they were presented. And we just had the senses that they had not set social media as a priority for engaging teachers, especially in the New York public school systems.
I think it's more than just teachers. I think it's parents. I think it's taxpayers. I think it's students. But they weren't engaging with any of them. So like you said, it was a warehouse. It was a storage locker. It was a place to broadcast what they were doing, but not engage and not try to really connect.
And so in that way, really missing out on the power of social media. That it's a one-way distribution of information as opposed to a collective community trying to improve education. And I thought that was an interesting approach that they were using, just because times have changed. But they are still a bit in the dark ages around that. And we're not seeing, oh, this is an opportunity to actually get people involved who have good ideas and a variety of experiences and are willing to share if given the platform. And the question is, what platform will the state of New York actually provide for that? Or are people actually going to turn elsewhere to have those kind of conversations? And our data proved they're going elsewhere.
And I think to your point, you mentioned teachers. I think we are teachers seeing it at the very top, tied with Edutopia and ASCD. They may have taken the benefit of the lack of interest, the lack of development, the lack of motivation by the New York State Department of Education, and they are thriving with their social media channels. And teachers are flocking there and being challenged, being made aware of new ideas, new opportunities, and they're engaging. They are motivated to share, to follow, to subscribe, to watch, and reviews as well. So, and the recency of posts are also included in this, because some of these posts were as recent as within the last 30 minutes to an hour, or even 5 minutes. And you can tell on social media how frequently people, or how quickly they're responding.
And one of the areas that we have for further study is to take a look at who else is using social media in this way. We used our initial entry point with these organizations that you see on the screen, but we still kind of kept our sensitivities out there for who else, especially in terms of state organizations, might be using it. And sadly, in that way, Department of Education in New York is ahead of most states. They at least have some presence, even though it's not much. I think we can see that there's an opportunity for other governmental organizations, departments of education, to interact with their educators, teachers, students, even parents, administrators, in the whole educational process, that hopefully some of our work here will begin stimulating some of that conversation.
Well, that's right, because we couldn't find any research on this topic, so we're creating it ourselves. And we hope that you'll go out and take a look at some of these organizations. You'll notice that some are .edu, some are .org, and some are .com. So there are commercial enterprises mixed in with the non-commercial enterprises here. So different stripes for different purposes, and it's kind of all combined with the same goals in mind, which is trying to improve the education of our K through 12 students. What a huge industry this is, what a great opportunity this is for growth. And so we're just showcasing a few sample examples that we're hoping will stimulate other researchers.
Especially in this environment, as we talk about growth, we really see this as a growth opportunity for organizations to really introduce with more of their market, whether it's they're nonprofit or for-profit, but they still have a market. And the question is, what do they do to draw more people into their orbit? And so as we look at product lifecycle, I see that especially use of social media, this is still, I think, on the vestiges of introduction, but of working a bit into growth. And there are lots of opportunities, and I'm assuming that if we look at that growth part of the product lifecycle, we know that it tends to attract more participants. And so it's going to be interesting to see just whether there is the flood, because there's the opportunity there.
Absolutely. It is the early stages. It is not too late to jump in and become engaged in social media. The stagecoach has not left the building. It is still there. And social media is changing in the last year, dramatic changes in marketing and the number of followers that these organizations has changed also. So we'll be updating that as well. So I'm going to flip here to our ways that you can apply this. We want organizations to be able to use what we were able to uncover, and whether they're in education, whether they're in environmental studies, whether they're in finance, whether they're in healthcare, we think that organizations can connect better using social media. And these are the 4 areas that we mentioned at our very opening slide. We just wanted to reiterate that here, that we think that the regular, consistent messaging is going to be the most effective in the long run. You know, there was a time in the days of Twitter where people were posting 10 or 15 times a day. And that really, or even, you know, every hour, every half hour. Does your audience want that? Is there really news enough to be doing that? So the question is, what consumer behavior are your followers expecting? And whatever that is would be a good regular and consistent pattern. It could be once a week, it could be once a day, or it could be once a month, depending upon what your messaging is. I don't necessarily think it's every half hour that you need to get out there, and that makes social media more of an interruption in a negative way than in a positive way.
And what really is important to have this regular and consistent is planning. That you really need to think through what are the types of materials that you want to be posting so that you can have something that's fresh, that's interesting to people. And that takes a lot of background preparation to be able to say, okay, these are the areas we want to emphasize in our social media presentation. And we want to make sure that we are having a solid piece of information so that we are not just having fill. Oh, we got to have something up, so we got to write something. No, we need to have thought through and be able to draw on that to make sure it's meaningful.
Absolutely meaningful, and again, engaging. And we use that in number 3 here again. So it's got to be interactive. And we're seeing more interactivity than ever before. I'm skipping down to number 3 because we got into discussion a few times about using bots and how the new technology of chatbots have, infiltrated all of our media. So being engaging and being interactive, this is where things are going. Yes, we're engaging with our Alexas today with voice. We're engaging with our Siris. People want immediate engagement, and social media can allow that. It's a process that can allow that if the organization is open to that.
And you just made the reference of who we talk to in that engaging process, and in many cases they are expressions of artificial intelligence. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see as we look into the future how organizations are using artificial intelligence to engage with their followers in much in the way, hopefully a much better way than as we call in at various places and we get to have conversations with some automated technology process to help us troubleshoot a problem. But it's an interesting thing to look at how might we use artificial intelligence to deal with some of the more standard types of questions and participation that might come in a social media environment.
Great point. I'm so glad you brought that up because AI is the hot button right now. Everybody's on it and thinking we can predict what the next best thing that consumer is going to want. And in some ways they are. They know what you want before you want it. It's a pretty exciting time right now. So being relevant and showing your expertise is really what going back to number 2. So the relevance and expertise of educators is critical. People are hungry for expertise. They want to know what you know. They want to know why it's relevant to them. They want to see the benefit, not just the feature to them.
And so they really need to make sure, and this is back to the point I was making about planning, to really make sure that there's something of, meat, some real substance there so that, again, whether it's just a Twitter post or something of more extensive on Facebook or a YouTube video, but that what you have then demonstrates the expertise because you're giving something that takes them beyond where they are.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And our 4th item here is about what you can do to increase your trust. Now, that's really important. It's an intangible, but we are trusting our followers and our followers are trusting us. So there's got to be a mutual trust in order to grab that, in order to keep that satisfaction. And one of the ways that we can build trust is to look at reviews, to look at the recency of the post, and to be critical thinkers about who it is you are following and who's giving you satisfaction. So not every organization is going to be the answer. So be selective with those organizations that you do trust. So with that, okay, so we have a few people who are on our webinar here, wondering if there are some questions that any of you will have. If you'd like to, you can type those into the chat box right here. If not, I have some questions that I'm going to ask Richard, or he's going to ask me, and we'll continue this chat for a few more minutes. We want to make sure that we give our audience a chance to really discuss. Okay. Before I do ask the question,
did Cheryl have a question? Okay, because we want our process to be as engaging as the social media.
That's the idea. So yeah, we mentioned artificial intelligence. We mentioned chatbots.
Can we ask the question directly, or does it have to be?
Go ahead. Ask a question directly, please, Dr. Corona. Go ahead.
Well, first of all, I think it's a very good work that you guys did, and it's something that is very necessary to have, like a, bird's eye view of how the organizations deal with social media for the dissemination of what they do and everything. And I think for me it was a very interesting discovery of many of the things that you could be involved with in social media. My question, and Maribeth, maybe you have heard it from me many times before, is that the people in social media have the presupposition that everybody uses social media, and that is not correct. I mean, I know a lot of people who are not even remotely interested in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. They don't even know what that is. So these are baby boomers. So I think for the millennials or these generations X and Ys, yes. And for some people, they want to use it, yes. But there are a lot of people that are not using it. So that's one thing. The other thing is, having said that, any organization will have a budget for a package that includes some social media, some newspapers, some television, some flyers, some events, many other different channels and ways to promote that. For instance, many of the ones that you mentioned, I don't even use. I mean, I use mainly Facebook, and I don't like a lot of advertising, and many of the other things that I know they exist. I know they're very engaging, but I don't have the time or the interest to really be engaged. And I know that's the case for Richard as well. Since I know he's not very much involved in using these social media channels yet, but I hope he's convinced now. He started using them like crazy. Anyways, so the other thing is, I have a small Facebook page with a nonprofit organization, and it's kind of it goes in ups and downs, because when we have an event and I have a lot of followers, and when we'll have an event or have something, I see that there are a lot of, dozens or sometimes hundreds of views every week. But then all of a sudden, I don't have anything for 2 months. And so there's nothing there. So it's hard to keep up with having relevant, updated, contemporary information all the time. And that's the key. Same for the websites, but here it's even worse, because you have 7 or 8 different channels that you need to keep up to date, and you need to keep responding to the people asking questions and engaging everybody. So it's really a challenge. It's really, really very complicated, very difficult. So yeah, but I just wanted to comment on that and commend you for all your great work that you're doing with this research. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
Thank you for that.
I'll jump in, because I appreciated all that. And one of the things that jumps out to me is it's really important for these organizations to really know who their market is and how their market accesses information. And if I'm not in their market, then they don't need to have something that attracts me. But if my market is really using social media, and it's made up more of millennials and the younger folks than that, then it is really important that they're using social media because these groups are. And so that idea of really understanding how a particular market receives information, looks for information, so that we can use the channel that is going to reach them, and the importance of using multiple channels. Social media is just one of them, and it has sub-channels we've been talking about here. So any communication plan for an organization really needs to have that broader perspective in mind on that. And this whole idea of making sure that the information is up to date and fresh, that is a challenge and a commitment, and it is not a fad. And I think a lot of organizations have kind of treated it as a fad. So they do a bit and then they move on, and so nothing happens. But that idea of thinking through enough so that you can be continuously, not every 5 minutes, as Mary Beth said, but regularly coming up with fresh contributions to the people who you're wanting to follow, so they remain engaged and are participating in the process. Thank you.
So I'd like to respond to Ramon's comments. First of all, I do agree there are some people who are non-users. Absolutely, there are always going to be. So we've got what we call, a total media plan that includes those who don't use social media as well as those who do. And back to Richard's point about finding who is your target audience, segmenting that, and positioning your message accordingly is what we teach here at National University. And we teach effectively because our students are proving that they get it. So thanks for that, Ramon. As far as a budget goes, absolutely. It costs money to do social media. And we realize that not every organization has the funding that is going to make for such a wonderful presence. And when I pointed out to the Edutopia site, obviously a lot of funding has gone into that from private donors. So we are pointing these out as entry points. You start where you can, right? You mentioned that you have a nonprofit. Hopefully some of the things we shared today are giving you some insights on how to build or not build your resources in social media. In fact, there might be a better channel next year that uses social media in a more meaningful way than your current page. Because as we know, Ramon, when you started that page a few years ago, Facebook was delivering those messages organically to your followers. And today, those organic messages are only reaching maybe 1 to 2 to 4% of your overall reach. People now have to go out and seek you out while they're in that platform, just like they would have to seek you out to find your web page. So it is becoming busier on the social platform arena. However, as we mentioned, it's still the early days. So the good thing is you're still ahead of the game. You've got something. People can come and they can find you in various places where they want to go. So this is among one of the many challenges that are being considered, and thank you for that. Okay, so that was great that you asked a question live. Thank you for doing that. If anybody else wishes to ask a question, they can raise their hand. They can, however
just unmute their mic and talk.
Yeah, it's great. Okay, so I'm going to go into the...
I just wanted to add something to the Facebook. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, but, that's okay.
You know, with the Facebook thing, I get constant reminders from Facebook that I haven't done much, that you need to do something, you know, almost every week. I got a reminders and said, hey, you have not said anything about it. You don't have any followers this week. Nobody has liked your Facebook page in the last 3 days, and you got to do something about it, post something. So they even have an automatic mechanism to keep you adding things and getting involved, which is great.
To nag
Absolutely.
you.
Yes, their algorithm is nudging you to provide that user-generated content. So you're feeding the machine every time you post something there. You're feeding their corporate coffers, really. So you're providing the content which they use to sell advertising. So that's really the model, the business model right now.
So we provide the material that they sell, the view.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So and hopefully we have an advantage from having put that material out there to be able to communicate. So it's a vehicle for us, but they're kind of tagging along with their clicks.
And mining the data in a big way. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop the share right now, and I'm going to just have a little different view here. And then I wanted to ask a couple of questions to Richard in the few minutes if we don't have any other questions. Let me go to the speaker view here. Let's see. Okay. So Richard, what strategic ideas did you have while you were conducting this analysis? So we talked about strategy before. What kind of thoughts were you thinking about?
Well, since part of my background is strategic management, strategy was a really important question for me as I was looking at it and thinking about organizations' strategic communication plans. So how are they really trying to communicate who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, and then actually provide information, which in this case for so many of these organizations, that is what they're supposed to be doing, is supposed to be sharing information about how to improve education in our country and beyond. And so I was really interested in how organizations really have an opportunity to use social media as one tool to carry out their strategic communications with their market, to be able to make sure that, especially for these nonprofits, often have multiple markets from funders to actual users. And so social media then becomes a tool to be able to accomplish that. And so that's part of what I was really looking at all the time, was how does this fit within what all they're doing in order to be able to accomplish their mission as an organization, which is the foundation for strategy.
Excellent. Excellent. Yes, I think that looking at the environment first and seeing what's going on as a trend in your followers and in their interests really builds the overall corporate value to doing social media. And listening, I think, is one of the most underestimated, undervalued ways that social media can be used. People think about just posting, but really, I think the listening part and being aware of what your followers are looking for. What are their needs? What are their behaviors? What are the interests? And I think that is really one of the most important elements of social media that often is really overlooked.
Because what we're really looking at is market intelligence. And we're traditionally, and what we see in some of the organizations that we examined, the information basically goes one way. It's flat. It doesn't really elicit people's reaction to what we're doing. And if you're really using the social media effectively, then you have this amazing, rich flow of information back to you about how your market is actually responding to what you're doing. And to me, that is just a really powerful tool, and it is an opportunity that we haven't had in the past to be able to gather this kind of direct, immediate information back from our market about how they are perceiving us. And in order to get that information, they got to care enough to give it to us. And therefore, we have that opportunity then to create in our social media sites the kind of opportunities for people to feel like, oh, I'm a part of this. I have some commitment to sharing my thoughts. And to me, that is a totally new experience, because before that always had to happen one-on-one.
Yes, people are self-selecting now. They want to be heard. You know, today's Cyber Monday. People are buying things and they're sharing what they've bought. And that gives a treasure trove of information to potential buyers who want to know, or even friends want to know, what did your friends buy, right?
And so it's helpful for the market to understand, oh, well, there are other people not isolated in my dealing with this organization. And that's changed. We had that sense of, I would go into a store and make my transactions. I didn't talk to the other customers. But through social media, we're talking to the other customers. We're getting their advice, even if we don't know them. We still ask our questions. We get our information.
And speaking of which, this trend just hit me today. Google is nervous about Amazon, because now Amazon not only has all of the things we bought, they have our credit card information, they have all that data. That, you know, Amazon is really a social media as well.
Yes. And
So,
look at all the sharing of reviews, which was novel when Amazon first started doing it, because they said, okay, I don't want people to review. They could say something bad. And what they did was say something bad. They said a lot more good. And people started going to Amazon for that social feedback and opportunity, and then stayed to shop. And it turned out to be a game changer. And now we see most organizations are trying to provide their own feedback opportunity. But I agree with you. In that way, it is also a social media experience, because there is interaction with those reviews and comments on the reviews. It doubles up in that way.
and just looking at the stats today, online shopping is up 18% year to year. That dramatic shift is disruptive. Retail stores are closing, and the social experiment is ongoing.
Now we take a look at Black Friday. What percentage of the total sales on Friday were online? Stunning.
Yes.
And but that sense of, we are moving into this environment more and more. And the question is, as organizations who have a message that we want to be able to communicate and gain that commitment, engagement from our market, we're seeing a possibility that is far beyond what was possible just such a short time ago.
Absolutely. The world is changing, and we are right in the middle of it today. So I wanted to, first of all, thank Richard and our guests, our audience here. We will make this recording available as well, and we hope that we will be able to provide insights to those organizations who can benefit from this presentation. And I want to thank everybody for being here. Any concluding words?
Just, I would like to invite feedback, because we're hoping that engagement process works and it can be conversation that can continue. And I thank everybody for participating today.
Thank you for inviting me, and great work, and best of luck with your presentation in Hawaii in January.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Goodbye. Thank you.
Goodbye.